Good morning, students. Welcome to Chapter 3 Introduction to Biological Processes. In this chapter, we will learn how psychology and biology is interrelated and what all is involved in this chapter. So, let's begin by talking about what we will study. Your goals for this presentation, we're going to describe the nervous system and its subdivisions and functions. We're going to describe the structure and function of neurons, discuss neurotransmitters and the influence of drugs, discuss the brain, major structures and functions, discuss brain lateralization and how the two hemispheres coordinate brain function. We can also talk about the effect of the endocrine system on behavior. We're going to discuss genetics, evolution, heredity, and how they work together to shape behavior. Now, the nervous system we know regulates everything we do, and it is a highly complex system that communicate through electrochemicals throughout our body that send signals from the brain throughout the body, and it is responsible for receiving and processing information in the body, and it's divided into two main branches, and you will have to know this for your exam: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord all coordinates together, that sends signals from the spinal cord directly to the brain and to the nerve cells that send signals throughout the body. So remember, the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Now, the brain, as you know, is divided into various sections and levels. So here you have the forebrain, which is the outer portion of the brain, which includes the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex and the structures of the limbic system. Then you have the midbrain. And the midbrain is that portion of the brain that serves as a relay station, which helps to coordinate reactions to the sensory events of the body. The cerebellum, which is part of the hindbrain, is a structure at the base of the brain which involves in coordination of complex motor skills and muscle movement in the body. Then that cerebral cortex, again, is that outer layer of the brain, and it controls your higher mental functions. We call it the frontal brain. Now, the neuron or the nerve cell, we've already actually discussed in the chapter on psychological disorders, but we discuss it again here as it relates to biology. The nerve cell, are communicators of the nervous system. This is where we receive the information, the brain integrates it, and it passes it along. And they communicate with one another with cells in the sensory organs and with muscles and glands. And each neuron has the same structure. Here you have your dendrites, your cell body, which surrounds the nucleus. And of course, the nucleus is the main uh, body of the bell of the nervous system, that where your genes and your chromosomes act. Then your axon, this long yellow tube down the middle that goes to the end of your terminal axes, these little bulbs that connects with your synapses. And then the myelin sheaths protect your axons. Here is a cross section of the neurotransmitters and the synapse. And the synapse is a gap between two cells, is which is called the synaptic cleft. synaptic cleft right here, and it allows the neurons to communicate with each other. And it is kept in these synaptic vesicles, the little round circles, which are small inside of the terminal button. And this is the terminal button. The molecules pour into the synaptic cleft when an action potential reaches the terminal buttons at the ends of the axons. You have the neurotransmitters, the little red dots, which are representative of the chemicals that are filled inside, and they fuse with the presynaptic cell membrane between the one neuron and another neuron. And this is our communication system of the nervous system. When we talk about agonists and antagonists, agonists act like the action of a particular neuron. It mimics it and it binds to receptors and generate postsynaptic potentials. For example, nicotine, which you know is a drug, it is an acetylcholine agonist, which acts like or mimics acetylcholine enough that it competes for those receptors. And when nicotine and acetylcholine attach to a receptor site, the nerve fibers become highly stimulated, producing a feeling of alertness and elation. Now, on the opposite end, the antagonists, these are chemicals that block the action of a particular neurotransmitter. They bind to receptors, but they can't produce these action or postsynaptic potentials or to fire up the neuron because they occupy the receptor site and prevents the neurotransmitters from acting. For example, the drug curare, which binds to acetylcholine receptors at nerve muscle junction, preventing the communication between nerves and muscles, slowing down the relaxation or the contraction of muscles. Now, we talked about the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, we know, is part of the nervous system, and it is made up of all the parts of the system except the brain and the spinal cord, and it belongs to the peripheral nervous system. And it has two parts, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic system. And the autonomic system is again subdivided into the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. The somatic system controls voluntary movements of skeletal muscles. The autonomic system controls self regulated actions of internal organs and glands. The sympathetic system of the autonomic system is that arousing or excitable part of us. And then the parasympathetic is the part that calms us down. We'll talk about each one of these separately. Now, the somatic nervous system consists of nerves that connects to the central nervous system, and it regulates our voluntary skeletal muscles and the sense organs, and you know what they are. And they are voluntary skeletal muscles that help us to move around. You have afferent neurons, which carry information from the muscles and sense organs to the nervous system. And then you have your efferent nerves, which carry information from the nervous system to the muscles and sense organs. And as you can see a comparison of the autonomic and somatic motor systems here in the diagram. On the opposite end, the autonomic nervous system consists of nerves that connect to the nervous system, to the heart, blood vessels, smooth glands, and other glands and smooth muscles. And the smooth muscles are those involuntary muscles that help organs such as the stomach and bladder carry out their functions. And it controls all of the autonomic functions in the body, including helping us to breathe, complete digestion, sweating, and heartbeat. And it is divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. And here in the diagram, you can see that the parasympathetic stimulates while the sympathetic dilates or increases, it constricts, slows down, and these accelerate. So they function in the opposite direction, and you will have to know this for your exam. Now, when we talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, when you're in a crisis situation, um, it activates and it may manifest as a rapidly thumping heart, sweaty palms, pale skin, panting breath, the kinds of things we experience during crisis. And we may experience these kinds of symptoms during a panic attack. And of course, when we are excited, that sympathetic system gets that adrenaline flowing, and then the parasympathetic, that norepinephrine, uh, slows us down and calms us down, gives us that calming effect. How does the endocrine system work in our body? Well, the endocrine system is made up of hormone secreting glands. It affects the communication inside the body. Hormones are chemicals that help to regulate bodily functions. Glands produce hormones and dump them into the bloodstream, and they travel to various parts of our bodies. The master gland, as we often call it, is the pituitary gland, which is located at the base of the hypothalamus, and it releases hormones that control other glands in the body. Thyroxine controls the metabolic rate. Insulin controls our level of blood sugar and is, of course, vital in the disease of diabetes, secreted by the pancreas. Melatonin, we already know, controls our sleep and our biological rhythms. Cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine, adrenaline, these bodily functions uh, help us during stressful and emotional times. Then other hormones we know are androgens, which are male secondary sex characteristics, sexual arousal in males and females. Estrogen we know aids in breast development and menarche in females, and progesterone preparation of uterus for implantation of fertilized eggs. And without all of these hormones functioning properly, then we cannot function well. Now, when we talk about biology, behavior, and genetics also come into play. And why is it significant to talk about genes and chromosomes? Because our body is made up of cells. And each cell has 46 chromosomes. They come in 23 pairs, as you see in the diagram. And the only ones that are not paired are your sex chromosomes, your X's and your Y's. And we know that the X chromosome is female and the Y chromosome is male. And sex cells are sperm in the males, and they are eggs or ovum in the females. And each cell has only 23 chromosomes. Chromosomes then are thin strands of DNA. These are your chromosomes, these thin strands. And each chromosome pair contains thousands of genes. Genes then are strands or segments of DNA that function as hereditary units, and genes are carried on through chromosomes. Now, when we talk about genetics, we talk about genotype versus phenotype. And genotypes are those alleles or genes possessed by an organism, example, inheriting two blue alleles from each parent. And here you see the flowers. Flowers may have dominant for white or recessive for purple. And this is the phenotype, the observable characteristics. Here, the Punnett square for eye color, blue eyes or brown eyes. Then, an organism phenotype is its observable characteristic. An organism genotype is its genetic composition. An organism heterozygous or different for a recessive allele, such as albinism, would exhibit the dominant trait but would possess the heterozygous genotype. And here you see, looking at her eyes, this is the Punnett square, dominant for brown and recessive for blue. And of course, she's 50% could have 50% of these characteristics come from both parents. Now, when we talk about genes and behavior as well, a lot of research has been done on family studies where researchers look at similarities among members of a family with respect to a particular trait. And they look at the relatives who live in a household together and they compare to see how the traits are similar. Twin studies give researchers more solid evidence about whether a trait is inherited, and they compare pairs of identical twins to fraternal twins. Of course, we know that monozygotic twins are twins that are developed from the same egg. Dizygotic twins are twins developed from different eggs. Monozygotic would be identical, dizygotic would be fraternal. Bouchard did a study where he um, studied twins reared apart and twins reared together, and he compared their environments and their personalities to see if there were differences. In adoption studies, researchers compare adopted children to their biological parents. Children living apart from their biological parents are studied to see if there are differences in their biological environments genetically, or how different they are to their adoptive parents. And research indicated that children whose traits are not more like their adoptive environment, then there must be more genetic. What is natural selection, adaptation, and evolution of genes? Well, again, we look at Darwin's theory, where he said evolution and natural selection, a characteristic that gives a reproductive advantage or survival advantage and passes on its genes to the next generation. He said that our genes are passed down from generation to generation, and he did studies to prove this with primates. Adaptations are an inherited characteristic that becomes prevalent in a population because it provides a survival or reproductive advantage. And because evolution occurs over a long period of time, an organism can remain in a population even after it has stopped being useful. Now, Darwin says that species occur over time. And this famous picture of his theory of evolution, where species are developed from primates and on down through the generations into the Homo sapiens that man is today, if you believe that theory. And this idea of natural selection and adaptation, here you see in one species where the giraffe neck started out shorter, and every species after that the neck got longer and longer and even longer now to where it could reach. So it produces a survival advantage for the species of the giraffe. So this is just a brief overview of introductory to biological processes, and we will study this more in depth in the chapter. So following this presentation, complete your 10 question video quiz.